Battle of Midway was occurring. During the Battle of Midway, Allies island hopped and started winning back the territory from the Japanese.
This topic is about Douglas MacArthur and how he impacted World War II.
Douglas MacArthur was a 5-star general whose plane was crashed during the Pearl Harbor attack.
How Douglas MacArthur impacted World War II was after Pearl Harbor, he went to Australia to command Allied forces after becoming a general. He also helped stop the war when he accepted Japan's surrender.
The Japanese surrendered because of the new and most cruel bomb.
Okay, good enough. Hey, were the Japans like the Mongols?
Not exactly. They have their differences, like including their appearances. For example, this is a Japanese soldier. And this is a Mongolian soldier. Another difference between them is the amount of people they had. Japan had 1 million, while the Mongols had 1,007. Japan had a shortage of troops, medications, and supplies. While the Mongols didn't have a lot of weapons, they did have an air force and a lot of aircrafts, while the Japanese had very little. Goodbye. Snazzy picture we got for you. It's for you, Jarrett.
This is your final question, number 10. Explain what the government did to discriminate against the Japanese and other minorities during World War II. What did the government eventually do to apologize for their mistakes?
Hello, I'm Anya.
I'm Megan.
And I'm Dylan.
And we're here to teach you about American society and economy after World War II.
In specific, we are going to teach you about opportunities during this time, along with discrimination and the internment of Japanese Americans. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. This is a shock to the U.S. and really worried and concerned them that the Japanese were going to sabotage by mining coastal harbors and poisoning vegetables. Currently, during the attack, 12,000 Japanese Americans lived in the U.S. A majority of them lived on the West Coast. This attack on Pearl Harbor did not come to the benefit for the Japanese Americans. So in 1942, the Japanese were called to be evacuated from Hawaii by mass by the War Department. This is a problem because Delos Emmons, the military governor of Hawaii, did not agree with this, as 37% of Hawaii's population was made up of Japanese Americans. This would have destroyed Hawaii's economy and would stop the U.S.'s military operations on the island. The governor was then forced to order internment and confinement of 1,444 Japanese Americans.
Let's clear 2 questions down. That way we have a little that way we answered all 3, and then we'll go more in depth.
After the decision was made to intern the Japanese Americans, many questions and arguments arose. One such question was, why were the Japanese Americans ordered to internment but not the Germans? This is because the attack on Pearl Harbor was such a surprise to the U.S. It made everyone so on edge. It made the U.S. on edge with the thought that Japanese Americans would sabotage. It started a huge wave of uncertainty against Japanese. Although the Germans weren't doing very good things either, they were doing equally bad things that had no benefit to the U.S. whatsoever. The thing is, the Germans were constantly doing bad stuff. The way of Hitler's ruling did not benefit the U.S. at all, and the things he did were terrible.
World War II was a time of opportunity for many Americans because we were now the world's dominant economic and military power. The nation's unemployment fell to 1.2% and weekly pay rose 10%. Even though pay rose, there were still many protests. Workers began to save up their paychecks to as much as half. Farmers prospered because of good weather, improvements on machinery, crop production, and crop price raises. The GI Bill of Rights provided education and training for veterans paid for by the federal government. opportunity. And today we have this bandana. Bandanas represent the women that were working during the time of World War II that took on men's jobs and helped to fight back home in America. The war created opportunities for women and their rights and gave them a chance to prove that they were just as productive as men. 6 million women entered the workforce for the first time, which is equivalent to 35% of women, many of whom worked in defense plants that offered better pay and more challenging work than jobs traditionally associated with women. Some women took advantage of openings in journalism and other professions, but unfortunately, when the war ended, many women lost their jobs. Hey, what's that sound?
Hello, I'm Eiko, an innocent man in this internment camp with all my fellow Japanese. The U.S. has interned us thinking that we were to sabotage their country, but all of us, I swear, are innocent. I've been separated from my family, and it is not enjoyable here. We are hoping to start a protest to get us free from this internment camp.
A series of riots in 1943 that broke out in LA, California, between American sailors and Latino youths. The zoot suits, as the Mexican boys wore, were flamboyant long coats with baggy pants and pork pie hats.
There were two conflicts that had a great effect on the start of the zoot suit riots. The first, on May 30th, 1943, involved a dozen sailors and soldiers harassing a group of Mexican women. One of the soldiers was attacked, and the Mexican men and sailors started fighting. The sailors eventually left, and the conflict was over. The second involved 11 sailors getting off a bus and getting in an argument. The sailors said they were jumped by the gang, and the LAPD recalled and brought 200 members of the U.S. Navy. The sailors spotted a group of young Mexican boys, clubbed them, and anyone who tried to stop them, then ripped off their suits and burned them right in front of them.
CORE, or Congress of Racial Equality, was founded in 1942 to confront urban segregation in the North. The violence of 1943 showed Americans just how serious racial tensions had become. By 1945, 400 committees were formed to improve race relations. In conclusion, CORE has improved racial relations in America.
I think you can go. After the war, the Japanese American Citizen League was started. That was an organization that pushed the U.S. government to make payments for reparation to every person that suffered from internment and to compensate Japanese Americans for property that they lost during World War II. So this meant that every Japanese that was interned during the war was given $20,000. In addition, a letter from George Bush was sent to them, stating, "We can never fully right the wrongs of the past, but we can take a clear stand for justice and recognize that serious injustices were done to Japanese Americans during World War II." It was almost like an apology from the U.S. for what the U.S. did to the Japanese during the war.
Remember, this test